The look is, to many, the most motivating series of all time, with each match being used to convey a psychological message and allowing us to see how each of the players respond to it. For 3 years, I've been analysing this specific side of the series in extreme detail to millions of people online. So today, we're going to be breaking down the endless layers within the series to find the central message of each one, starting from Isagi's first one against Kira. On first watch, this seems to just be setting up the idea of being selfish, or more accurately, not being afraid to make the decision that's best for you when you need to. Isagi passed here not so much because he thought his teammate would be more likely to score, but because it'd been drilled into him that he shouldn't shoot here, that he shouldn't have this solo ambition. His concern was more of what would come across well and what would fit in with what he was asked to do, rather than what was actually most likely to score. And this moment, combined with Jinpachi's speech following this, puts forward the idea of having confidence in yourself that it can be you. That sometimes putting yourself first is not just what's best for you, but also for those around you. The look as a whole has actually kind of shifted away from the whole be selfish thing anyway. Especially upon rereading, it's clear that the real message of this game is not don't pass your teammate or always put yourself first, but simply that we underestimate ourselves. That we're often too concerned with fitting in and going along with what we've been told to consider what we could actually manage if we put all that aside and focus on what we wanted for ourselves. Isagi thought after this loss that he was from a different world to Kira, that he could never go pro like him, and effectively gave up on that dream because it didn't seem possible anymore. And that seemed pretty reasonable at the time, right? After all, not everyone can go pro, but of course, looking back, we know how wrong he was. We really have no idea what we're capable of a few years down the line if we just stick with something. Moving on to the tag match, which is what makes Blue Lock my favorite episode 1 that I've ever seen. There's so many moments I could point to, like Isagi's final volley or Bachira stealing the ball, but the one that's always stuck with me, that made me realize that I'd really underestimated what I was in for, is Isagi's decision to not eliminate Igaguri. Because not only did I think that him deciding to put himself first in this me or you type situation was going to be the twist of this episode, right? The main character accepting a slightly darker as such side of him. But not only was I shaken by an even crazier twist, but it's that next line. At this rate, I'll be the same as I was before. If I don't beat someone stronger than me, nothing will change. And especially that, if he can't have some confidence in himself now, then when will he? If he doesn't have the guts to take the harder route now, he never will. People waste so much of their lives believing that someday they'll lock in and fix everything, only to push it further and further down the line, push it back to tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that, because they can't break out of their comfortable routine, or they're waiting for some perfect circumstances where they have everything figured out, and then years go by and they're still waiting. Isagi does the exact opposite of all of this here. He took not just one, but 2 crazy, unnecessary risks, right? He could have just left the ball and he would have cleared this round and Bachira would have been eliminated, right? But he knew that if he doesn't put his foot down to start acting like someone who would become the greatest striker now, it becomes far too easy to fall into this trap of one day I'll do it, and then never actually starting. The longer you wait for perfect, the longer you spend feeling safe, but really you're just wasting time that you're going to deeply regret in the near future. So start now. Moving on to the first selection, which is really Jinpachi's way of drawing the players out of the very safe, realist shells and getting them to experience some real intensity and stakes, forcing them to think about what they can do instead of just their teammates. And we kick off the first match against King Barou's Team X. And very often in my videos, I reference that moment where Isagi thought it was impossible to defeat him, that has come so far since then. That what he, not too long ago, thought was impossible is now totally reasonable, and is a really beautiful example of how we really underestimate what we're capable of But I've just covered that, so instead what I really want to talk about is the rest of Team X, the 10 players that no one could even name. Because the second they saw how good Barou was, they stopped trying. They became content to just rely on him and give up their own ambition. They stopped trying to figure things out, they just saw this easy, safe route that ensured victory. And it's a little hard to blame them for it because it made logical sense at the time. There was an explanation for it. But a very consistent theme throughout all of Blue Lock is that the players who try to take an easier route and rely on their teammates, instead of putting all their focus into bettering themselves, inevitably pay the price for it. Team X are all eliminated. Kuon doesn't go through, Naruhaya doesn't get chosen, etc. It's a brutal but I think very important truth, and one which I wish I'd kind of accepted at an earlier age. No one is coming to save you. It really is down to you. Obviously, yeah, other people can help you out and that's totally fine, but if you're always reliant on someone else, if you always seek someone else to make your decisions for you and give you the push you need, you'll never develop yourself at all. And even more generally than that, if you always take the easy route, at some point it's going to make things a lot harder for you. You will eventually pay the price for it one day. The easier road turns to the harder road before you even realize it. The earlier you swap over, the better it will be. And the Team Wire match quite naturally follows on from that. There's not as much to say here compared to some of the later matches, but the moment that always stood out to me was Isagi finally deciding, I've had enough of being the way I was, it's my turn. A switch that never actually happens to a lot of people, that it can absolutely be your turn. There's no reason it can't be you. There's not as much separating you from everyone around you as you might think. He describes it as being reborn, as discarding the old version of himself that acted and thought a certain way, to becoming something new. Someone working to become a great striker instead of just playing football. A very distinct, important difference. The change in identity is super important. Your actions will naturally follow the way you see yourself. If you see yourself as someone who acts a certain way, it'll become so much easier to do so. Obviously easier said than done, but the first step is exactly what Isagi did here, realizing that it can be him too, instead of thinking everyone else is somehow above him. Now the Team W match is of course Chigiri's match. Following Kuon's repulsive betrayal, we get a look into Chigiri's past, where he used to believe that the world was divided into the talented and the talentless. And following an injury that could potentially end his career, he becomes terrified of losing that dream of becoming the best in the world. His whole self-worth, his whole life, revolved around his ability to just sprint past opponents. And so the thought of now losing that forever is so terrifying that he ends up in this middle ground where he doesn't actually want to quit, but he's so scared of running properly again in case it really does end. He can't let go of that remaining glimmer of hope, yet has no faith that he could actually make it in the long run. Instead, watching the clock run down so that he can have that decision forcibly made for him. A peaceful end as such, where he gets to justify to himself, well, there was nothing more I could have done, you know, I can't play for Japan now anyway, so that's it. And I think we're all guilty of doing this at some point, of finding a reason why we can't do something, of having an explanation for why it's impossible, rather than trying to see if we actually can. It's a lot easier to see the reasons why you can't than why you can, and it can be a lot more comforting in the moment to tell yourself it's impossible than face the risk of trying and failing. But in the long run, it doesn't actually make you feel any better. That middle ground of wondering if you really could have is often far worse than even the worst failure, which might not even happen anyway. The spark finally hits him when he sees Isagi fighting so desperately against equally overwhelming odds. Yet instead of being paralyzed by self-pity like Chigiri was, he keeps fighting until the end, because what else is he gonna do? Just stand there and regret it for the rest of his life? Like, there's nothing left to lose. And as Chigiri finally stops beating himself up and decides to give things one last go, we get what is probably still the most hype goal of the entire series. Moving on to the final match of the selection, and what a match it is. There is so much I could say here. I love Nagi's realization that challenging yourself can be fun, that often we get sucked into doing things because it's easier, not because you actually enjoy it. And that pushing past that initial difficulty when you want to do something productive often actually results in more fun. I love Bachira looking at a challenge as a chance to test himself rather than something to fear. But all of Team V's goals, Nagi's second goal, and of course the final goal of the game in Isagi's iconic direct shot, show something that not only completely changed the way I see myself, but is also my absolute favourite way of using awakenings that I've ever seen in a series. In the final seconds of the game, needing a goal to survive, when the pass comes overhead to Isagi, he thinks to himself that he needs to control the ball and then shoot. That's what he's always done because he doesn't even think to just volley the ball initially. He's not even aware that he could pull that off, and yet, of course, he does. And it was the same for Kunigami's longer than normal shot, Chigiri having to find a way to use his speed to get past Santetsu, Nagi's off his back control. They were all things that the players weren't even aware that they could do. That ability existed within them. We've seen that they could do it, but they didn't know that they could. And it's not just that they were selling themselves short, it's what brought that out of them that's particularly interesting. As Jinpachi says, an awakening isn't a supernatural phenomenon or acquiring a new ability, it's the moment you learn what you're actually capable of, something that only occurs in extreme circumstances, such as facing someone much stronger. The weaker one integrates all of their abilities to invent a new formula to seize a victory. In other words, it comes when the challenge is intense enough that it's beyond what you normally do and you can't get by with just your usual routine, and you have to figure out something new. That's when you realize that you could have done so much better this entire time, that you had a lot more in you than you realized. Your ability often caps at the target you've set. For example, if you tell yourself you're going to run 5 kilometers, you'll stop at 5 kilometers even if you could run further. Or the example I gave in my last video was that often in the early stages of a game, you don't optimize what you're doing at all because you can clear the low-level enemies without any real challenge. You don't have to do everything you can to get past them. It's only once you get later on and the challenge increases that you have to start to figure out how to use everything you've got more efficiently. And only then do you actually start to perform at your maximum. You won't figure out how to get 100% out of yourself when you simply don't need to. And you've experienced this a lot before. You know, if you remember back at school how you'd maybe leave your homework until the day before it was due, even if you had 2 weeks to complete it, that's known as Parkinson's Law, the famous observation that work expands to fill the time allowed for its completion. And a very similar thing happens with your ability and your target. You won't know what you're capable of until you really start to stretch yourself. And we all know exactly what the biggest culprit is. We reach for our phones the second we get bored. It takes us hours to get something done that should only take 30 minutes because we just keep scrolling. And the solution is an app I've been using called Reset. Because it's not a fight I can just win with willpower. I've tried that so many times before, but our brains are literally wired to choose the easier thing over the harder thing. Even when we know the damage it does, even when we don't really want to scroll, we just kind of reach for it out of habit. Reset forces me to be productive in order to earn my scrolling time. I turn it on and every addictive app gets blocked. Instagram, TikTok, all of it gone until I've actually done something productive. And what I really love about it is it automatically tracks the good habits I'm trying to build. You know, walking, sleeping, time with your phone, and then it gives me screen time back as a reward so that if I do scroll, I've actually earned it first. I've done something productive before that. Doom scrolling was not only sapping my time and my focus, but also so much of my potential. You know, just imagine how much more you'd get done in a day if you never scrolled at all. Within a few months, you would be a totally different person. You could have changed your entire life in that time. So hit the link in the description or the pinned comment, download Reset, and when you sign up, use code ANIME. And with that, moving on to the second selection. Now, the 3v3 against Rin is another very short match without too much to really say. A lot of it is covered much better in the following 2v2, so I'm going to move along pretty quickly. But it's interesting how quickly the gap between him and Rin is closed by the time they get to their rematch. From feeling like he was insurmountable here to them actually being able to fight back later on, it only took a few little changes for him to significantly catch up to him. Obviously, they are still a long way behind still, and in reality, it wouldn't ever be that fast. But regardless, I think the point still stands that often even our most ambitious goals aren't as far away as we sometimes think. Sometimes it's just a few routine and habit changes, a few things that you learn and understand, and that's all it really takes. And on that note, we have the 2v2, and this is the most underrated match in the entire series. I know it was a while ago, but no one ever seems to really talk about it, despite the fact that Isagi's breakthrough here is so core to who he is throughout the rest of the series and the messaging of Blue Lock as a whole. Nagi and Barou start off dominating this match, both grabbing 4 goals each to get the score to 4 all. And Isagi is kind of lagging behind even Naruhaya, who, let's be real, no one even really remembered from the first selection. It is a brutal experience for Isagi, who finds himself with his back against the wall, with everything seemingly falling apart for him. He's surrounded by way better players, nothing is going his way, he's one step away from losing it all, and in that situation, most people respond one of two ways. Firstly, they get really down on themselves, they beat themselves up, they think to themselves, I'm not cut out for this, I'm no good, what's wrong with me, etc. You know, they become consumed by self-despair. Or, number 2, they get frustrated. They start to look for ways in their head to justify why the people who have what they want don't count. Or they just tell themselves something to dissipate that frustration. But Isagi does neither. It would have been incredibly easy to start coming up with a whole list of things he could have said about Naruhaya. That he's being arrogant, that he's so dependent on Barou that maybe he doesn't deserve to win here and is just being carried. You see this kind of thing a lot online with anyone is doing well in anything at all, people are very, very keen in the comments to find something that they can say to kind of tear them down a little bit so that they can dismiss what they've just seen. But Isagi doesn't. Instead, he does what I would genuinely argue is his most important moment of the entire series. His realization that, sure, he can't suddenly learn Barou's immense power and skill or Nagi's ball control, but there are things that those around him are doing that he can start to do. And sometimes the difference between you and someone else is often really that simple. It's not that there's anything wrong with you, that you were born without something, that you lack something. It's just they're doing something that you're not even aware of, let alone actually doing. And having the willingness to accept that you don't know everything, that you're not doing everything you could be right now, and learn from people that you might even feel reluctant learning from. It's something it took me a long time to be able to do. You know, I really struggled to put my pride aside and do that, but it is incredibly powerful and something that you can just start doing immediately at the flick of a switch. It is the fastest, most efficient way to get better at absolutely anything. And it is exactly what's taken Isagi so far and allowed him to end this match with his first victory over a player who he didn't think it was possible to defeat when they first met. And on that note, our next game is an absolute banger. The 3v3 with Barou joining up is where Isagi goes from just surviving Blue Lock, getting through each round, to becoming a real threat on the pitch. For many, this is where the series reached a whole new level, and there's a lot I could say, but really, this is Barou's match, and one where he has to learn what it means to lose. He's gone from dominating every match he's in to, for seemingly the first time in his life, struggling, being completely unable to score and at times outright humiliated by his own teammate. His whole life he's dominated the sport on account of his incredible work ethic and raw talent, so this was baffling to him. But his initial response is one of anger. It's something I'll talk about more in the Manshine game, but he seems to believe himself entitled to succeed because of the amount of work he's put in and how talented he is. But the world is a very, very big place. He's been a very big fish in a small pond up until now, and is now learning that no amount of talent or hard work actually guarantees anything at all. There is always someone better. There will always be a point where you hit a wall and lose. Jinpachi even gives a whole speech about this after the match in chapter 67. Yes. Anyway, even the greatest striker in the world can't win every match. It's a phenomenon that occurs without fail in the world of competition. Jinpachi says the important part being to etch that despair into your soul, to acknowledge the mistakes, accept that you've lost, instead of explain it away. And when you actually look at Barou's record at Blue Lock, by this point he played 6 games and lost 5 of them, only winning the very first one against Isagi. Yet after every single loss, he is totally unbothered by it. He is certainly not willing to reflect on his own gameplay. It's always someone else's fault. Or he just doesn't even really think about the fact that he lost. And we see him in this match attempting the exact same thing multiple times, and not adjusting his approach at all, even when it's going nowhere. And it's easy to confuse this with resolve or dedication, but in reality it's actually quite the opposite. It's a lack of resolve to accept that you're doing something wrong, instead wanting to just hit his head against the wall until it finally breaks. And the next scene almost made me feel sick the first time I watched it. The scene of Barou, alone in this little dark room, sipping on a beer, clearly deeply miserable, watching Isagi live out his dream. And it's so deeply uncomfortable to me because it's so easy to end up like this. Obviously, it feels like a slight overreaction to having one bad game and making one pass, and it absolutely is. But at the same time, and I spoke about this in a tag match, it is extremely easy to say, oh, it's just a one-time thing. I'm just taking the easy route or skipping what I need to do this one time. And then it spirals into becoming a consistent thing. You know, we've all done this, me included, right? We say we're going to be consistent with something, we justify why we can't do it this one time today, and then we never do it again. Obviously, there's totally legitimate reasons to miss a day, and if it truly is just a day, it's not the end of the world. But I think it's important to ask ourselves, if I allow myself to miss today because of this reason, how many times is it going to come up? If it's super often, maybe it's just an excuse instead. The problem obviously isn't the past itself, right? It's why he does it. He's allowed this setback to just shatter him, and he's not willing to push through that difficulty, instead opting for the easier, safer route. And if he's going to completely break down every time a game starts badly, that will be the end of him. Not everything is going to go your way forever. Sometimes you have to snap out of self-pity, put down the beer, and just do what needs to be done, regardless of how difficult it feels in the moment. Okay, moving on to the 4v4, the rematch against Rin. And this is the best match of the series because we get to see Bachira's mum. I mean, it's a cool match, right? All the goals are really well crafted. I like how they work around Rin. It never feels unbelievable that they get past him because each goal uses something that he couldn't have known before. You know, they are just catching him off guard each time. But of course, for this video, I'm going to be talking about that final goal and luck. You know, the thing that author uses to resolve every high-stakes match, it seems. But I actually love the explanation Jinpachi gives here of being pooped on by a pigeon. It's very easy to write things off as just bad luck, something you couldn't have prevented, when in reality, if you'd been more aware, if you'd considered looking up, you could have avoided it. In other words, what we often write off as luck Sometimes it's really us just not understanding something. And as proof of this, chances are if you've ever really gotten into anything at all, you'd have realized that there's a lot more to it than outsiders would appreciate. You know, if there's someone who knows nothing about your thing, you could probably tell them a lot that they didn't know. What looks like randomness or relatively simple to outsiders can actually be extremely complex and calculated to an expert. There might, of course, be some randomness, but whilst some people will simply wait and respond to how that randomness plays out, others will actively plan around it. In Blue Lock, this usually manifests itself as players realizing that ball was going to deflect off him and it could land anywhere around them. In some of those positions, I can't score, but in some of them I can. So even though it is random where it lands, if I go to the spots where I can score, that's better than going to the ones where I can't. And this, of course, is exactly what happens with Rin here and Isagi in the U20 match. To some of the outsiders, including Isagi's friend in quotation marks who you'll see at the start of Season 3, it looks like they just got lucky because they don't understand it. They don't recognize the thought process that went into it, that they looked several moves ahead and figured out where they could go to benefit from luck. Most players couldn't have done that. They did get lucky, but they got lucky because they're skilled. An average player might happen to stand in the right place by chance, but if you were to repeat that 100 times, Isagi and Rin would win far more because they actively prepare rather than just passively observe and hope for the best. They improve their chances of getting lucky. All of this is to say that the next time you think someone got lucky, they might have done. Absolutely, some people are, but they might be looking up at the pigeons whilst you don't even realize they're there. They might understand something you don't, and once you figure that out, you can probably avoid them as well. And I do have to add this in, I feel like YouTube is a great example of this. You know, before I started, I thought a lot of the big channels just happened to get lucky, and they might have kind of done so, but they definitely understood a lot that I don't even understand now, let alone back then. There is so much more to it than I was even remotely aware of before I started. But anyway, the World 5. A very short match, but there's one single line in here that has stuck with me since I watched it. It has altered my brain forever. It is absolutely legendary in my eyes. There's a reason Jinpachi spent so much money here, that the JFC threatened to shut down the whole project because of it, and it's simply because he knew that getting the players to have this realization is that important. Upon Isagi realizing that, despite how far he's come and how hard he's worked, the gap between him and the world's best is wider than he could have even imagined. But he doesn't despair in the slightest. His eyes light up in pure, childlike wonder and awe as he says, "They're so far away from me. This is the level I'm aiming for. Soccer is amazing." And really think for a moment, is that what you think when you see someone so far ahead of you in something you care about? Do you get excited to reach that level one day? Or do you get frustrated because you feel super behind? I was always frustrated. I used to watch people who are further ahead and feel this mix of envy and defeat rather than inspiration. Until I saw this scene. And now I just think, man, I can't wait to get to that level one day. Every time I watch the scene, it's like a mental reset for me that gets my head back to the right place. It's scenes like this that remind me why I love this series so much and why I started this channel in the first place. It's simple, but it's a life-changing one for sure. Alright, now it's time for the arc that not a single one of you thought about when you clicked on this video, the third selection 6v6s. And I'll be honest, scripting the first match here was the hardest part of this whole video because there's just not much going on here that hasn't been covered already. So even though it's technically explained after this match, Isagi is only able to surpass Rin and Shido because of this mechanism, flow state. It's not the most complicated topic in the world, but it's probably Blue Lock's most easily practically applied one. It simply states that when the challenge is too easy and success is certain, you'll get bored and won't really try. Likewise, if it's too hard and you can't possibly picture a way to reach it, it causes you to become anxious. You need something that genuinely stretches you, but you can still imagine yourself being able to do it. And I've repeatedly found that the target is probably a little bit higher than you initially placed it. It's generally quite easy to find a good number. If your target can be measured and quantified, just start with a reasonable number, then go higher and higher until you just really can't possibly picture yourself actually reaching it. And that's it. It's super quick, super easy, but really, really impactful. You know, going back to the Team V match, aiming for that will bring out a whole bunch of things within you that you don't even know exist yet, because you've just got to use them to reach that number. Now, the second match, I actually think is a lot more interesting. And not just because we see Igaguri, but because it's actually the only game in the main series we see without Isagi. Besides, of course, that one 2v2 which was cut, but I won't go into that in case Season 3 does. But this game is from Ryo's point of view, and it didn't really hit me the first time I read it, but I actually feel like it's become incredibly relevant and relatable for modern times. He's essentially stuck, in part because he doesn't have a single outrageous talent he can pride himself on like those around him, but also because he just can't quite seem to bring out enough fire within him. Coming from such an incredibly rich family, he's essentially got nothing to properly lose here. Even if he's eliminated, he can go home and make a life there, in his words. When you compare that to the frenzy we saw from Team Z, fighting like their life was on the line, or he's currently playing against Shido and Rin, who seem so dazzling to him, so incredibly fired up like it's baked into their very souls, he just can't seem to find that same level of passion. And obviously, even without the rich parent background, I feel like this is a lot of us. We have some things we're good at, but nothing we're spectacular at. We have some interests, but nothing that really sets us ablaze. And honestly, that is kind of normal, right? No one is fired up all the time, but sometimes it feels like there's nothing. Like we're just watching everyone else live the way we want. And I think a big part of this, which I'm sure any manga readers will know I'm hinting at here, is that we get just comfortable enough in our general lives to the point where it's almost hard to justify being crazy about something. You know, we're not super happy, but it's kind of bearable to the point where we don't feel like we desperately need to escape it. You know, just kind of numbing ourselves is fine. But that's not really a fun way to live. You know, not being excited by anything, just coasting by. And I think to break that, in Ryo's words, you have to almost be an incredible idiot. Which I say as a compliment, not an insult, because if you stop and rationalize everything and want an explanation or a reward for everything, you soon find yourself losing that fire, because we generally don't need to pursue anything these days. We can get by, at least. Obviously, Ryo's circumstances are very different to the rest of us because, you know, he's not got to worry about work or money, etc. But even so, there's no rational reason for him to pursue the World Cup with everything that's being handed to him. But he recognizes that being comfortable all the time, getting everything he wants, is actually kind of boring. We need something more exciting, more stimulating, more engaging. And if you feel like you can't find it, you're probably thinking too hard, you know, weighing up the outcomes and the rewards and what's optimal and what you're going to get out of it, etc. You're probably confusing easier with more enjoyable and wondering why you're still bored, right? Scrolling your phone. Very easy to do, but not actually super enjoyable, right? And so going back to flow, of course you're bored and nothing seems interesting when you're taking the easy route all the time. If you were stuck playing against enemies that were way weaker than you all the time in a video game, it'd get boring really fast. You know, if you're level 20, they're level 1, sure, it's easy. You could do it all day and kind of pass time, but it's not actually that fun, is it? And in reality, no one is going to take you out of there and put you somewhere more interesting. It is entirely up to you to make that move. On to what is still my favorite match of the entire series, the U20 Showdown. At 35 chapters, there's quite a lot to pick from here, although a lot of that is either half covered already, like Isagi's luck, or Sai trying to get the U20 team to be more fired up, or it's just more thematic rather than anything that fits my channel. However, I knew exactly who I wanted to talk about for this match as soon as I had the idea. And this might surprise you, but it's Aiku. In particular, his flashback where he basically accepts that he's lost his belief he could become the best in the world. Simply because too much time has been wasted. He didn't take the right approach when he was younger, and now he doesn't believe he can turn it around in time. And I don't know about you, but that hit me like a damn truck, right? But at least Aiku did something. Even if it wasn't perfect, you know, I'm nearly 27, and I can honestly say I feel like I wasted all of my life until I started this channel. Just spending all day, every day doing nothing at all. Jumping from one form of distraction to another, having nothing I'd really developed about myself or that I could point to and be proud of. And what do you do in that situation where you realize too late that your dream is honestly dead? When, like Aiku, you just can't envision yourself reaching it now. Chances are that's probably only truly the case if you're aiming exceptionally high. Like, okay, sure, if you're starting now, maybe you can't become the best in the world or professional at it, right? Maybe you'd have to adjust it slightly, but that doesn't mean don't start. It doesn't mean you shouldn't bother. It would be kind of crazy for Aiku to quit entirely because that one goal of his was out of his reach. And I like that not only does he simply change to aiming to becoming a top defender, but there's no bitterness over it. You know, there's times where he wishes he was with the Blue Lock guys, but he has no resentment or deep regret over it. He simply makes the most of what's available to him now. And I know a lot of people in their 20s, I see comments on this from people even younger than that, feel like it's too late for them. It's not. I promise you, no matter how old you are, someone older than you, started at their age, is doing great, and is baffled by you thinking it's too late for you. And again, people get so stressed over, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not going to be doing it perfectly. I'm going to be bad at it, right? Just like when you have these kind of regrets and you look back and think, oh, I wish I'd started that 5 years ago. You don't think at all that you had to do it perfectly. Just that you kind of had to do a bit of it quite consistently. You know, imagine if you did it once a week, every week for 5 years, or you did 5-10 minutes a day of it. That'd be awesome, right? But you don't want to be thinking that again 5 years from now. You know, looking back and wondering why you thought it was too late for you or you couldn't start because you wouldn't do it perfectly. You know, start doing it now and awfully, if need be. And with that, we lead into the Neo Egoist League. So if you're watching Season 3 right now, I'll be calling out the name of each match before I start talking about it. So if you want to drop before you run into any spoilers, you're able to do so. And if you are going to drop before I get into the FC Barcha match, a huge thank you for watching, and I've got plenty of other Blue Lock videos if you need more. So with the spoiler warning out of the way, getting into the NEL's first match, which is pretty straightforward, honestly. There's not a lot to say about the match itself because it is really just there as an introduction to the format, but whilst I'm aware this puts me in the minority, and I do still think what he says is a less practical version of Chris Prince's teachings, I actually really like Lavinio. So when he says that infamous line that he's not going to teach them anything about soccer, a lot of people, myself included, kind of just took that at face value on first read through. But that's not actually what's happening. We see him giving them training plans and things like that. What he's really saying is, unlike the Japanese soccer world, which drilled this play style into them, instead he wants the players to think about how they want to play. Instead of looking for some golden nugget from someone else that's going to revolutionize their gameplay, instead he tells them to observe the players they genuinely admire and feel excited by, to copy them and over time mix in their own original elements. And honestly, I think this is great for just getting started on something. You know, don't overcomplicate it. Just follow what someone you admire is doing. Maybe you can change things down the line once you understand more about it. But it's a good starting point, honestly. There's no shame in copying what actually works. Now, the Manshine match has a lot more to it. It's probably my favorite in the NEL, and whilst I'm sure some of you expect me to talk about Isagi's analysis of Kaiser, being willing to accept the gap between them and analyze it, breaking down his two weapons into something he can and can't learn, etc., I think that's all covered back in the 2v2 match. Right, again, incredibly underrated for how often that point comes up. I also, as you might know, absolutely love Chris Prince's whole deal, but I've got entire other videos on that. So instead I want to talk about Yukimiya here, and the whole idea of everyone having their own protagonist feeling. How we all see ourselves as the main characters of our own stories. Which is fine, as long as you don't forget that everyone else is the main character in theirs. They can do all the same things that you can. And at a level like this, everyone is working hard. Everyone is doing everything they could possibly do to succeed. And so whilst the entire message Jinpachi drilled into the strikers earlier on was aim higher, be so ambitious you aim for the greatest in the world, etc., that's cool and all. But that ambition doesn't actually accomplish anything on its own. Just wishing and wanting to do well doesn't actually change what's in front of you. Yukimiya is an incredibly talented player, but at times in this match he seems to almost just demand that he scores on account of his tragic backstory and hard work. He thinks himself a lot about how unfair it is that Isagi's getting what he gets whilst he isn't. But that's simply not how things work. The defenders don't get easier to beat because you think you deserve to beat them or you desperately want to. As after all, they're all thinking the same thing. This match is described by Jinpachi as a clash of stories, with everyone having their own, and the players need to believe in their own stories without becoming drunk on them, without deluding themselves that it will happen just because. Yukimiya steals the ball off Isagi and begins to charge towards the goal, and the whole time he's basically cursing the unfairness of it all, and trying to make a desperation play that had, in Jinpachi's words, no chance of scoring a goal. And it's a recurring theme throughout the series that these types of plays where frustration takes over just don't work until they return to looking at what they actually need to do to succeed. It's a trap I very often fall into myself, thinking, I've worked so hard, I've had it so tough, I should get something out of it, it's so fair. And just trying to brute force my way through things with sheer effort instead of looking at what I actually need to do. Almost refusing to accept that what I'm doing isn't working and I'm just spinning my wheels instead, much like Yukimiya, who just would not listen to Isagi no matter how many times he told him that he'd be much better off going for an assist instead of a goal. Unfortunately, no matter how badly you want something, how unfairly the world has treated you, or how much effort you've put in, none of that guarantees or really changes anything. It's brutal, it's horrible, but the world just doesn't care. You still have to look at what's in front of you and navigate through it, or you'll just keep hitting a wall and wondering why it's not accounting for your past. Ubers is an awesome match, and Snuffy is the coolest, most interesting character in the series, besides maybe Hugo, because up until now, there was a whole herd of elephants in the room regarding Jinpachi's philosophy. The most glaringly obvious one, which, to be fair, he does actually address himself, is that of these 300 strikers, at least 299 of them can't become the greatest in the world. He says himself that their lives will be ruined. And so, what about the others? Are they just wasting their time? How should they respond if and when they don't end up as the greatest? Because, realistically, that's gonna be most of us, right? It just simply has to be. And before this, we had a great example of how badly this can end through Hiyori's parents. Two national silver medalists who, despite incredible accomplishments, were not just unsatisfied with being second, but so resentful and bitter about it, where they lived vicariously through their son to try and appease those regrets. And obviously this is ridiculous, right? They should be incredibly proud of what they've accomplished, but according to Jinpachi, is basically worthless because they didn't get gold. And I see this a lot, right? You know, people have done so well, achieved so much, and still hate themselves because there was a level above that. Of course, Mick Moon is an even more extreme example, you know, not even seeing life as worth living if he couldn't be the greatest, but especially in the modern world where we are bombarded with the top, you know, 0.001% of people take up 99% of our algorithms. There's so many people who just can't help but compare themselves to that. They feel like it's never enough, and so they never actually feel good about themselves as a result. Whilst I totally agree with Blue Lock that ambition is awesome, I also think that the two examples I mentioned were extremely important for the series to show. That there's a need to, in Snuffy's words, be able to love yourself even if you're no longer a genius. Not just because there's a very real chance that you won't make it to the very top, but also because when you wrap your entire identity on a certain given result, two things happen. The first of which you've likely already experienced. When you obtain that goal, it does basically nothing for you because you expected to reach it, right? Yet when you don't reach it, you feel awful because you should have gotten it. It's a lose-lose scenario. And secondly, when anything goes wrong, it feels like life or death. It causes you to spiral down and change up your whole approach, doubt yourself, consider quitting because your whole worth is attached to something. You know, I've often seen that the people who are more like 80, 90% all in rather than 100 often end up going further. You know, a great example is, remember back against Team V, when all of Team Z gave up because they were taking it so seriously. They thought this is life or death for them, and so when they started losing, it completely broke them. Some of them collapsed to the ground thinking it was all over, except Bachira, who just had that little bit of who cares in him, that not only let him keep going, but shined so brightly that he inspired his team to make a comeback, purely because he cared that little bit less about defeat. He didn't tie his entire worth to the result, he was just kind of enjoying it. It sounds a bit counterintuitive to a lot of Blue Lock, but it's the difference between seeing a setback as just a setback and putting way more weight in it than you should because you can't picture anything outside of that pursuit. And again, without going into any spoilers, there were very much some desperation plays in the France match caused by exactly this. However, Snuffy arguably goes a little too far with trying to shield his players. He tells them that all the responsibility would fall on him if things didn't work out, and in doing so effectively absorbs all the despair and frustration that the players would have felt if they lost. And it's totally understandable why, given his past, right? He doesn't want someone to go through that again, but in doing so, he creates an environment in which things just don't particularly matter. You know, everything's fine. If it goes wrong, who cares at all? You know, and as we've seen with Japanese football as a whole before Blue Lock, that kind of just results in stagnation. It's also the problem a lot of people have these days where they just feel completely apathetic about everything, right? They can't see the point in anything. They feel like it doesn't really matter if they do, it doesn't matter if they don't, and so they never actually do anything. Snuffy gives them all these strategies and tactics to use, which are great whilst they're playing for Ubers, but it won't really help them that much. And they're with 10 totally new players who don't have all these strategies memorized. He's telling them what to do rather than allowing them to learn and grow themselves because he's terrified of one of them ending up like Mick Moon. He's terrified of them losing and not being able to handle it. And of course, it's Barou's goal which makes him realize that, of course, everything he's doing and everything he's taught them is important. So there's a bit of passion, a bit of a spark, some stakes, you know, something to be won or lost. And trying to shield his players from disappointment doesn't teach them how to handle defeat and setbacks. And so what I'm trying to say in this very long yap is, neither extreme ends well. To think that nothing matters and you may as well not even bother usually just results in you doing nothing all day with no joy or excitement whatsoever. But simultaneously, treating it as truly life or death, feeling like if you don't win there, it's the absolute end of the world, often ends up being kinda counterproductive. It matters, but it's never the end of the world. And with that, moving on to the final NEL match, and it's probably going to be Season 4 rather than Season 3. So again, spoiler warning, PXG is Blue Lock's longest match. It took a whole year to release, but despite how long it is, I'm sure you know exactly who I'm going to talk about here. Kaiser. Chapters 260 to 266 are some of the best in the entire series. They transformed Kaiser from a cool character, an entertaining antagonist, to an utterly phenomenal one. His backstory was obviously a wild reveal for a sports manga, suffering brutal, dehumanizing abuse from his father throughout his entire childhood, and only being freed from it due to Raydark's conditional offer that he makes it as a professional footballer. His freedom, his escape from that hell, was purely dependent on getting results. And even before that, remember, he had to steal food to survive. If he wasn't successful, he wouldn't get to eat. He'd be beaten by his father. Success was literally life or death for him. And Blue Lock very much does not shy away from the impact that our childhoods can have on us, with them sadly causing some deep, long-lasting tendencies that we're not really aware of. It can take a while and some guidance to kind of unearth them and put them behind us. When Kaiser's throne is threatened, it causes a severe reaction within him. We see the desperation and fear it causes him, believing that everything he's built will be destroyed if he's shown up in even one match by Isagi, despite the fact that the world's best club sent him an offer with a $2 million salary in the previous match. And he's 19 as well, remember, right? So it seems ridiculous looking in. But to Kaiser, it's ingrained so deeply into him that he just can't ever lose, that to him it makes complete sense. And it's obviously not his fault at all, right? It's incredibly easy to see how he's ended up this way and why he's so petrified of losing it all. Because, the only good things he's ever had in his life have come from extreme accomplishments. So, of course, he thinks the solution to everything is just accomplishing more. But really, he's trying to cover up all the problems he got because of his childhood. And until he stops to properly address that, he'll never feel like he's got enough. And even without the same kind of backstory, I think a lot of us fall into the same trap. We think that we'll feel better ourselves once we achieve X or achieve Y, or that once we reach that level, then I'll finally feel good about myself, and it never happens. Much like Kaiser, it's just never enough. And it's a tendency we all have because it's nice to have that hope. It's nice to think that once we get to that day, things will be better. It's 100 times easier to get through anything negative when you can picture an end point. But the problem comes when you finally reach it and you still don't allow yourself to be proud or happy with what you've accomplished. You will spend your entire life feeling like you've never done enough. You see this a lot in the fitness world, for example, right? Guys who are in really good shape, in fact, some of them in unbelievable shape, right? And they still hate how they look because they're constantly comparing themselves to the next level. And it's a really tough balance because we've seen throughout Blue Lock how much that ambition has done for a lot of the players. But Snuffy and Kaiser are both brilliant examples of how it can really become more of a pitfall if not approached correctly. With the solution essentially being just to know that there's a life for you outside of any given pursuit, and to actually give yourself some credit for your accomplishments. I'm obviously not saying don't care or actively chase. You can absolutely still be excited and passionate. I'm just saying don't expect that one accomplishment to fix every problem that you've got, because you're just going to be disappointed that it didn't, and you're still going to have the same problems you did before. With that, we move into the U20 tournament. So likely Season 5 content. Drop a comment if you're watching in 2030 and the trailer for Season 5 has just dropped. But Nigeria were a really cool team. Anazi is an awesome character who reflects a lot of the points Blue Lock has made throughout the series. However, I gotta admit, I didn't think too much of the Nigeria game on first read. I just didn't have that much interest in it. But there's a little part in chapter 321 which, for obvious reasons, really jumped out at me. And I can't not talk about this given what this channel is. After Nigeria go 3-0 down, they've decided to start to copy Blue Lock's style. All of them going for their own goals instead of just funneling balls to Anazi. And Isagi immediately calls them out as just being temporarily worked up, comparing it to when people watch a movie and decide that they want to be like one of the characters, only to forget that feeling by the next day. They just passively take in the most convenient parts of it. And you can probably see exactly why I'm talking about this part, right? Because I think we've all done that. We see a cool character, you know, a superhero or whatever, and we imagine ourselves like them. Want to be as strong as them, as competent, as charming and cool as they are. Then within a few days, we've just kind of forgotten about it and moved on. And Isagi makes a really good point that a lot of the time, this is because we were just inspired by the end result, the most convenient parts of it. We don't consider what actually goes into all of that, how much boring, repetitive practice it takes to get to the level we admire. It's no wonder that kind of motivation doesn't go anywhere, because it's just never going to be strong enough to push you through all of that work. But, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's a very important reminder, no one is motivated all the time. No one, you know, you cannot rely on motivation. You shouldn't run out of motivation and think, oh, where's the next place I can find it? Well, I just can't do it today because I'm just not motivated, so I'm not going to do it. You need to be willing to do the boring, uncomfortable parts that you don't see often in fiction, right? Especially in Blue Lock, where obviously all the focus is just on getting the players fired up. We don't see the days where they don't feel like it, but they still train anyway, right? And if you feel like you've been in that cycle a lot before, or getting super motivated, wanting to be like someone, then just falling right off within a week or two, Isagi's second point to Nigeria likely explains why. It's because they keep shifting that feeling of discomfort away from themselves. They don't let that frustration sink in or accept where they are and their weaknesses. As soon as they start to fall behind Blue Lock and run out of time to make a comeback, rather than looking at what's gone wrong, they just claim, let's focus on scoring a point. If we can score a point, something will change for us. And like, it sounds good, right? Oh, you know, positive thinking and whatnot. But really what they're doing is they stop thinking about the problem. They're not looking at why they're not scoring. They're just saying, okay, we'll score, right? Except, of course, Anazi, who recognizes that something genuinely needs to change. And that kind of change can only come from actually feeling frustration rather than sweeping it under the carpet. As uncomfortable and horrible as it may be, admitting to yourself that you don't actually like where you are instead of pretending otherwise. You know, positive thinking is great and all, but it works so much better when it comes after admitting you don't like where you are right now. And with that, the final match at the time of writing is France. And of course, we're talking about the man who took up 90% of the screen time, Hugo, who believes that we are essentially born with specific aptitudes and ceilings that we can reach, and that aiming beyond that simply causes pointless conflict and despair because those dreams are unobtainable. Instead, we're better off living in accordance with our suitability. As he says, it doesn't mean don't dream, it means don't dream beyond yourself. And he certainly has a point. You know, it would be crazy to pretend that talent doesn't exist and doesn't matter. However, I think what Hugo is saying applies very differently to people at the top 0.01% elite level than it does the rest of us. At that level where everyone is working incredibly hard, doing everything they can to get even a tiny improvement, talent is going to end up being the deciding factor a lot of the time. But that's not where the vast majority of us are, right? For the rest of us, what separates us from where we want to be is often just time, consistency, and intensity. And that, of course, comes so much easier when you are genuinely excited about what you want to do. When you have a fire that pushes us beyond what anyone around us is doing. It's very difficult to force intensity over a long time when you don't really care. And this, of course, is Isagi and Blue Lock's approach. For example, Barou's refusal to pass. It's ridiculous, it is obviously not optimal, but it gets him fired up, and having such a skilled player going at 120% is more than enough to make up for that. I went into this in a lot more detail on my Hugo video, which I'll link at the end for you to watch next, but I think the very core of Blue Lock has always been that you should have enough faith in your own abilities that you being fired up is the most important thing. And that as long as you find what gets you driven, that'll be more than enough to get you what you want. Thank you very much if you made it all the way to the end of this very long video. A special shout out to Gasters, Eve, and Didi for joining the Patreon. Thank you very much. And I'll see you guys again soon for even more Blue Lock.